Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ask Cadence. My name is Pete Wright. Each week, before we sit down and record our Ask Cadence episode, we sit down and we talk about what it is we're going to talk about that week. We talk about the problem cards that have been submitted by you, our listeners, and our classroom attendees, and we determine what the best issues would be to cover on the show, the biggest project problems. Well, this week, Scott Lissit asked the question, what happens when you encounter a project organization that is run exclusively by consensus? Well, it turns out this was a pretty loaded question and sparked a pre-show debate between John Patton and Scott Lissit that was interesting enough to be its own show. In fact, a series of shows. So this episode, as well as next week's episode, will actually be that pre-planning conversation. Please listen to it, and I hope that it sparks some conversation on your end, some debate about the kind of project organization you run, the kind of project organization you're a part of, and thoughts about what you might be able to do to help streamline the decision-making process for your own projects. And now I'll get out of the way, and we can join this conversation in progress between John Patton and Scott Lissit on project management by consensus.
So project team meetings have to be consensus. Everybody's got to agree.
That's terrible.
And the project manager has very little authority. And I'm working with a company now where that's their typical way of doing things. And they are so hesitant to say the project manager has authority to make decisions.
They make the project manager a second-class citizen and try to prove that he doesn't have the authority. That everybody's equal. Is that kind of consensus?
They are trying to. They don't want the project manager to dictate anything to the team. Everybody's got to agree.
Well, it can work if the project manager fills the role of consensus leader. That causes the consensus to happen.
Well,
but if there is no leader to take the group to consensus, then the project will never end.
Well, but I think consensus is not a good model to use when managing projects.
I think it's a great model.
I think true consensus takes a very long time.
No, I think it's absolutely fantastic, and actually the best technique around in think, study, and research phase.
Well, there are other models. There is the what I call the consultative model, where the project manager has authority, but asks everybody for their input, and then encourages debates among the different opinions, and then the project manager makes the final decision.
What phase?
What phase? Planning phase.
Oh, I don't know if I agree with that.
Because otherwise, if you're looking for consensus, true consensus means everybody has to buy in.
Oh, I already discounted it for the planning phase.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about the early phases?
Yeah, think, study, and research consensus is great. Consultative engagement is great, but for planning and implementation, it's alignment is the way to go.
Right.
Which says experts are the people who decide, who make the decisions. And the project manager's job and the team's job is to determine who the decision makers are going to be. Find out who the right person is.
And what happens if the team just can't make a decision?
And it gets escalated.
Well, then the project manager has to make the decision.
Well, the decision has to go to the right function. Usually key decisions are really aligned to a function. And it's the project manager's job to determine which function it is. It's got to make that decision. And if the representative from the function can't make the decision, then he's got to escalate. Within that functional line. And I'd still follow our rule about going 2 levels above the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, if no decision is being made, the project manager must make it. Must get the best advice possible and make the decision, because it's better to proceed with an 80% chance of being right than to not proceed at all with a 100% chance of not finishing the project. But part of it is where these techniques are used, I think.
I think also defining the techniques too.
But when you're using a consultative technique in planning, it could be maddening because it is not necessary in many of the cases, particularly if you're defining responsibilities on the responsibility matrix. And perhaps in scope, but so much has come together by that point in time that you really want to get focus alignment and a sense of team.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking about where the team is putting together scope and trying to decide what they're going to do on the project.
And in that sense, so my question would be, so they're in the planning phase, what didn't get done in research phase that causes them to be so uncertain of scope at this point? Because usually when I go in and do a startup, scope is not a difficult issue.
Yeah. I guess what I was talking about is where the project team becomes paralyzed, because the project manager feels like he can't lead the team because everything has to be consensus driven.
Well, let's put that in
and so
the
that
research
gives all
phase
the
then.
power to somebody who wants to hold out.
Yeah.
Oh, well, 1 person out of 10 doesn't like that approach. So now what are you going to do? Are you going to have, follow-up meeting after follow-up meeting to try to convince this 1 person out of 10 that this is the way to go? Or are you going to give your project manager authority to say, I've heard all the options on the table, 9 of us want to go in this direction, I'm just going to say we're going in this direction now?
Well, let's say we're still in the research phase, and that's the case. If our project manager, I'd make the decision, but then I'd escalate up to the management above it to get buy-off, because usually this guy that's opposing it either has a personal hidden agenda or a department hidden agenda. And if it's a personal hidden agenda, we can get by that by talking to his manager. But if it happens to, and usually if it's a personal hidden agenda, that will be well known among the team, and it'll be well publicized because he's done it before on other projects. And he may have been even overruled on previous projects. But if it's a department agenda, then we've got to deal at the management level with that because he's following orders. He may be totally loyal to that manager above him, but it's the manager above him that's pushing this opposition.